welcome to the Hunt Backcountry podcast. Today we have another experience project episode on the gear category. Again, for the experience project, we have three big categories: the gear, the hunt, and the hunter. And today it is the second episode where we are talking about gear, and it's the second most important item for the backcountry hunter. First up, we had talked about footwear, and today that number 2 item is your pack. Now, we're not just saying that because we make and sell packs, and we'll get into that. We're trying to have a conversation today that removes our bias and just gives you some objective information on what to look for when you are getting into a pack that is capable of load hauling for backcountry or mountain hunting. Along with this podcast, we do have a video where Steve goes over packs, as well as some of the key takeaways summarized in an article. So be sure to check out that link in the show description. And as always, if you have any questions for us, you can send an email. And again, that link is also in the show description. We're going to get right to it, guys. Here is myself and Steve talking about what you need to look for in a load hauling hunting pack. Steve, this is going to be a fun conversation. Obviously, I think we should not only talk a little bit about our, bias in packs, and I want to explain what kind of our bias means, but really just history, because it is unique as we've talked about this content. And in certain areas, we're relying solely on our expertise in the field as we use things like footwear and shelters and clothing. And then in other areas, we're pulling in experts on a particular area. And in this case, you essentially happen to be the expert. I mean, packs have been your life for more than a decade. So I just want to lay that foundation and obviously explain a little bit on where we're coming from when we talk about packs today, because it's going to sound self-serving. It's not. We're just trying to talk about here are things to look for in a pack. And of course, since we design and make packs, we've designed those things into our packs. But I almost want to set the stage of you as, you haven't been more obsessed with anything in the last decade plus than I think packs, right?
No, yeah. As we're early on in the project here, but certainly as we're having discussions, kind of lining out what we're talking about, right? There's trying to decide like what's priority, what's not. Obviously, you've always heard if you're like into researching backpack hunting and what do I need, what do I not need, what do I need to do, you hear boots and packs, right? Like those are the two most important things as far as gear is related to that you really need to dial in. There's kind of a classification, I guess you could say, of things I could, if we're leaving on the caribou hunt, I believe August 13th, there's a handful of items you could buy and have shipped to your door August 10th and be just fine. Boots, your pack, and your weapon, like you better be getting that early in the year and getting used to those, getting familiar with them, breaking them in, getting proficient with that weapon. So certainly those 3 items are why, they're early on here in our discussions for a very, very good reason, because they are the most important and also have the, being the most important, have the most chance to make or break a hunt. And it's not by accident that I own a backpack company, right? Like being obviously through like have a passion for designing backpacks and getting them to perform at their peak, but also from a business standpoint, it's like, hey, everybody eventually is going to need a good quality pack. So this is probably a good business to start out with. So we can really just kind of start diving into the specific features that, if I was, not affiliated with Exo, that I would be looking for in a pack. Obviously, as you said, it's going to be self-serving here because everything that I'm looking for is like on my checklist of the mandatory things that our backpacks need to have built into them.
Yeah, for sure. And it's obviously as we talk about packs, we're talking you and I, from a backpack hunting perspective, and for the experience project and the hunts we're doing this year, packs are absolutely critical. And then for many of you guys listening, the pack is going to be critical. But we're just, again, for very basic beginners, we are talking about a framed pack that has the capability to haul meat at the end of a successful hunt. And in most instances, is also going to have the capability to allow you to get into the backcountry or get into the mountains and live with what you need, only with what you have in your pack. And so there's a segment of folks who will be day hunting, but still use a frame pack that's capable of hauling meat. But just to let context be there, we are also mostly coming at this from a backpack hunting perspective, and this combination of a pack that can haul meat, it can carry weight, and is also going to enable you to do a multi-day, fully self-sufficient trip for a hunt. And so that's how we're approaching this. So just have that mindset in mind. But let's start at the very basics, Steve. Like before we get into nitty gritty, before we get into design, what are we actually looking for? If we say that, if this multi-day pack and something that can carry weight, it's so easy to get like lost in the minor details first, but let's talk like 30,000 foot view. What are we looking for?
First, completely ignore the bag, completely ignore the accessories. Like all of your focus when you're like trying to line out what packs to buy need to begin with the frame, right? The frame is what, the frame is what the equivalent is to boots, right? Like it's in contact with your body, it's doing all the work. Um, if it's not comfortable, if it doesn't fit right, that's going to make your life miserable. Uh, it the bag is completely secondary. The accessories are even beyond that, right? Like it'd be a very common thing, like, well, I like this pack and it's good, but this one I really like how it carries my rifle, so I'm going to go with that one, right? And like completely ignore the suspension, the frame design of the pack, and what actually matters, right? So when we're starting with the frame, there's certain things that in my mind, absolutely has to have. And keep in mind, we're going to say this over and over again. We're we are trying to get the absolute most performance out of your gear for these style of hunts to make these hunts as easy as possible for you, as comfortable as possible, to allow you to stay out there longer, to do things that frankly, you may or may not think are possible, right? Kill an elk solo 8 miles back there and pack it out. Like we want to give everybody all the tools through all the experiences that we've had to be able to go do those types of hunts. So the starting with the pack, the hip belt is going to be very critical. If you're looking at packs and it's like if there's less than three sizes of hip belts, that would steer me away pretty quickly, right? If they just have like maybe a small and a large, getting a proper hip belt fit is really, really important. So you want the foam. Essentially, you want as much foam wrapping around the front of the hips as possible without the ability to max it out under heavy load. So the very first thing you do when you get that pack, if you're at a store and you're trying it on or it comes in the mail, is put it on, cinch the crap out of that hip belt as tight as you possibly can get it. And if you're not maxing out the adjustment to where like the buckles are touching in the front of the pack, from being adjusted all the way out, then you're good to go. But if there's too much of a gap, right? If the foam on both sides as it's wrapping around the front of your hips is stopping short of your like the front of your iliac crest, then you need to jump up with the hip belt size. So you want to start with we got a proper hip belt. Next, we want to look at the frame height, which is hopefully, a standard in the industry is going to be like a 24, 25-inch frame that's going to fit most guys' torsos pretty well. And the reality is a lot of guys are, you know, that 25 inches is a good height. That all of our early packs, we had one frame size. That's what we went with. So that'd be kind of your a good starting point, unless you know that you just happen to have a pretty short torso. So if you're 5 foot, you know, 7, 8 and shorter, or you've got really, really long legs, you're 6'1", but you wear 34-inch inseam pants, and that's going to tell me you got a pretty short torso. Um, but getting the proper frame height is critical, and that you want that frame high enough above the top of your shoulders that the strap, which is called the load lifter, is going to be elevated above your shoulders, and it goes to the very top of the frame. So when you snug that up, it actually is creating some type of lift, right? That it's lifting the load off the top of your shoulder, and actually just transfers it a little bit more to your chest, and that helps a lot with kind of fatigue at the end of the day. The pack's going to feel lighter when you have a proper lift, when you have everything set up correctly.
Can we pause on that on load lifters and go a little bit deeper? Because there's a lot of, I think, confusion out there about that. So let's start here. How tall is tall enough? And I know that there's no specific answer here, but people get kind of wrapped around like, oh, like the load lifter angle has to be it, and they'll throw out a number. They'll throw out an angle,
Yeah.
right?
hmm I'm sure you could, sit down and be overly analytical and find like the optimum angle. But reality is, even within a person, that's going to change throughout the load. If you have 10 pounds, it's going to sit kind of high. You throw 130 pounds in there, no matter the pack design and how well designed it is, it's going to sit lower on your body. You're just fighting, an extra 120 pounds of gravity. And so that load lifter angle is going to change. To me, like real world practical field use, anything, I'd say an inch and a half at a minimum above the shoulders. To If you get too high, things kind of start getting weird as well, just because that angle's so high, and you're more running into head clearance issues there. Maybe things feeling a little tippy at the top. An inch and a half high to at the most, I would say, if you've got weight in the pack and you look at a mirror that the frame's like, no higher than the top of your ears, that would be pretty stinking high. Um, so the exact angle doesn't matter, just the ability to be elevated an inch and a half above your shoulders. And that way, when you're tightening that strap, it's lifting, it's not pulling back, right?
Hmm.
You got to keep in mind that lift word. Like it needs to be high enough to lift the top of the shoulder harness off of your top of your shoulders.
And then on frames, can we spend a little bit of time on things like structure, size? I don't necessarily want to get into material because that's actually less relevant than people think. According to what's more important is the frame design, and then
hmm
is the material kind of up to the task of that design. But can you talk about some things on, solid frame sheets versus vertical stays and width of frames and things like that? Because that's where there is a lot of disparity on the market when you look at different frame packs. You have everything from of course, the old heavy, like very bulky external frames, and then
hmm
ours is pretty narrow, and then you have a lot between, but you have all these different shapes and construction methods. And of course, we can't answer every question, but that's definitely something that, as we said, frames a priority, frames something you should look at and start with. So as customers look at the market as a whole and see a lot of different frame designs, and again, it's impossible for us because we feel like we've designed everything for a purpose. So it's impossible for us
hmm
to say there's something better because we feel like have tried everything and have built the best we can. But just talk a little bit about that, the frame shape, size, structure, etc.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, you need some form of rigidity to transfer the load of the pack down into your hips, right? And that can come in the form of stays, which is going to be very common, right? And could be aluminum, could be carbon. Frankly, that just doesn't, I mean, there's some minute differences there, but you could I could put aluminum stays in your pack, Mark, that are fairly rigid and tough, and you could hunt an entire week and not know that, take the pack off and go, oh my God, there's aluminum there, not carbon. You would never know that difference. The real benefit there is some strength and weight savings with the carbon, but not actual performance in regards to how it's carrying and riding on your back. So you got stays. You're seeing a lot of companies come out with what I would call a frame sheet now, and that's come in various forms throughout the years. Sometimes it's a thick plastic. Right now, it's like a couple companies I've seen use like a thick plastic within then like a thinner aluminum stay that's kind of there's a pocket sewn into that, and they slide that stay down into there. So they have those two kind of working together to form the frame. Um, More recently, you're starting to see what I would or a carbon fiber frame sheet. So it's basically like a 1/8 inch thick carbon fiber that is, it's going to be 6 to 9 inches wide at the bottom, taper up to 10, 11 inches, 12 inches wide at the shoulders, back of the head, and then just be kind of a consistent thickness all the way down through it. So just imagine a sheet of carbon that's kind of molded and cut to your body. So that's going to be one option. You obviously got like a tubular style frame, which is going to be any type of pack frame. In general, those are going to be for what we're talking about, what we need a pack to do. They are, with a properly designed shoulder harness and waist belt, an external frame can be incredible. Like if all I ever did was haul moose quarters and didn't like care about anything else, then our exo packs would look different, right? They would have a very different thing. But we're trying to design a pack that's lightweight, that's comfortable, that moves with you all day long. So it's not like you're wearing a sheet of plywood against your back. And then, essentially we want the best of both worlds. We want it to feel like, a super light pack you bought at REI for, just hiking around, going to a lake or something. 20 pounds in the pack feels amazing. But then you kill something and all of a sudden that goes to a 120-pound load. The pack needs to be able to handle that as well. So there's a few specific things you need the frame to do that. So as far as the lighter loads, that frame design needs to be, flexible-ish. It needs to move with your body. You'll definitely, if anyone has had a very stiff frame on their back, they can attest to it. You feel the pack all day long when you go to step up and over a log or you go to do anything dynamic. It's just not moving with you. That stiff frame is going to feel better with heavy loads. If you look at external pack frames, so your old school pack frame, right? Metal tubing. Um, One of the key factors in why they carry weight so well as a general rule, is going to be that the frame does not change shape once you load it down. Whether there's 10 pounds on there, 110 pounds, whatever, the frame doesn't change shape. There's nothing bending, twisting, moving. And that way, all of that load is directly transferring down into the hips, the suspension. A very common thing that you have to kind of fight in designing these kind of lightweight all-purpose packs is what's called barreling. And that would be, uh, imagine strapping let's say a 55-gallon drum, but that's almost too big, like a 5-gallon Home Depot bucket to the pack, right? And as you pull on the compression straps that are going to be on each side of the pack, and you pull those tight and and suck that bucket up to the frame, you want the frame to resist taking the shape of that bucket, right? Like that would be called barreling, where if the frame doesn't have enough structure really kind of horizontally throughout the pack, that it's now barreling. So what you're going to feel is right in the back of your shoulder harness, instead of the nice pads sitting on either side, the middle of the pack is now poking into your back. And that's going to cause a lot of discomfort, a lot of instability, cause you to have to kind of adjust the suspension to kind of make that ride somewhat well, and be very, very uncomfortable for you. So barreling's a big issue that we try to address in our pack designs. The That's why an external pack frame does really well. Generally, with the problem with frame sheets is getting them to be dynamic enough that they can kind of handle all of those tasks, right? They're if it's if the carbon fiber, you're just playing a game of, you know, what do you want more of? Or, you're trying to get the best of both worlds and find a happy medium. Like, okay, I've designed enough flex into this frame that it doesn't feel too stiff while I'm day hunting, but also it's stiff enough that when I go to throw an elk quarter on there, that, it's not buckling underneath that weight. It's not barreling. It's not compressing vertically. So that certainly the our frames are designed very specifically to address these as best as we can. So we have two horizontal or two vertical carbon stays, sorry, that are very strong, very stout, and then we put three horizontal carbon stays that go throughout the pack. So one's like 8 inches up, the other one's 15 inches up, and the other one's like 22 inches up from the bottom of the pack. And those are it's all designed to be stiff vertically, and then the horizontal stays do not allow it to barrel. So we can't change the shape and design of that suspension no matter what load we're putting on it. Yeah, does that cover it?
Yeah, that's super helpful. I want to come back to loading meat, how that's done, the importance of security on that, but just to touch on something else on fit and comfort. One thing that is so hard to assess and see as you're looking at packs, considering packs, and which does play a great role in comfort, durability, longevity, is what's inside. It's what's beneath the harness or inside the hip belt. It's typically foams, right?
Mhm.
Can you just talk a little bit about the drastic range of, I guess, like quality and types of foams? Because again, this is something that is very overlooked, and I don't fault the
Yeah,
customer for this. It's like hard to see, it's hard to interpret the quality
yeah,
and the importance of that, but you've clearly essentially tried everything out there,
yeah.
and there can be drastic levels of difference in things like foams.
Yeah, let me get so we talked about the hip belt, we talked about the frame, talked about the frame being tall enough to create load lifter angle. The next step is the harness, right? And a harness doesn't actually, this will tie into foam here in a second. Um, the harness doesn't actually need to be super robust. Um, if you have a properly designed hip belt with a good amount of, you do need padding on the hip belt, with a good amount of padding and a frame design that's, you know, when I'm talking specifically about heavy loads, that's stiff enough to transfer that load down into the hip belt. And that connection of the frame to the hip belt is absolutely critical. When I'm designing K4, I spent the bulk of the 3 years focusing on that spot right there, how the frame connects and basically ties into the hip belt, because that's where that load transfer is happening, right? So if you got a really good hip belt, you got a good frame, you got a good connection of had good design of how that frame's transferring into the hip belt, then the shoulder harness really doesn't have to do a lot of work. It's there. We try to describe it as it's more there for stability than it is for anything else. It's holding the pack close to your back so it's not falling away from you, and it's also nice. It's got a nice fit and it's snug that it's keeping the pack from swaying left and right. Um, and then the absolutely critical, like deal breaker, is if the pack does not have an adjustable torso, just disregard it immediately, right? Like you have to be able to, for everything to work and function right, you have to get that torso set properly for your body height. If a pack, even if it comes in small, medium, and large, which would be like a common thing among REI style backpacking packs, right? Like the torso isn't actually adjustable, but it does come in three sizes, kind of like your hip belt does. Um, Deal breaker, right? Like you need to be able to micro adjust that down to half an inch increments in order to get that shoulder harness fitting properly. Because if you're not, depending on the cut and the shape of it, the you're never it's never going to feel good. You're always going to feel weight on your shoulders. It has to be set up properly. Going into foam, I think a very common request I've seen over the years is I want like a really thick shoulder harness. When I got a really heavy load, the pack's kind of digging down into my shoulders. Generally, I say like you need to go back, make sure that everything's set up correctly. Because even with, I'm not going to say there's no pressure on your shoulders, but once you get to those loads in that 80-pound range, um, if I just stand up vertically with a properly set up suspension, I should have zero weight on the top of my shoulders. You should be able to kind of like roll your shoulder around and get like an air gap between the top of the top of your shoulder and the foam and this the shoulder harness. Um, and then if I'm it's very common. Like if you lean forward, you're actually kind of lengthening your spine, right? Kind of imagine like arching over and touching your toes or whatever. Your spine is lengthening. So as I'm hiking up a hill, it's very natural. As I'm leaning forward, you're going to get some weight on the shoulders. That's just because you change the length of your torso, right? And then opposite happens when I'm going downhill. If you're kind of leaning backwards, you're shortening your torso, and it's going to take weight off the top of your shoulders. But a common request again would be like really thick foam in the shoulder harness, and just for fun, I've built those prototypes over the years many times. Run like a really like soft 1 inch thick foam up there, and one of the problems with foam design is it they all have a density, right? 2 pound, 3 pound, 4 pound, whatever. And the as foam, you can take a foam that is feels pretty good and soft when it's half of an inch thick, but you make it 1 inch thick, and all of a sudden, like if I was just to hand that to any random person that walked into the shop, said, "Is that like, what do you think of these two foams?" And they go, "Oh, this one's nice and soft, but this one's pretty firm. This is too firm, right?" Well, it's the exact same foam. It just went from half an inch to an inch thick, and in that changing that thickness, it becomes a lot more dense. It's one so that you can't just scale a foam up. I can't take what I've got, use my existing foam, make it 1 inch thick because it'd be way too stiff and uncomfortable on your shoulder harness. So to go with a thicker foam, you then have to drop down into densities. Um, and then you run into durability issues. And also, if you go too soft, that foam is just, if it has no kind of um, pushback and kind of a give and take to it, then that super soft foam is just going to compress all the way until it's fully compressed, and then you have no padding at all. So what could look like really plush, soft foam that's 1 inch thick, when you actually put weight on that, it's going to go down to 3/8 of an inch thick and feel like a rock in your shoulder. So it's finding a foam that has enough kind of resistance to fully compress like that. Think about it much like the shocks on your truck, right? Like if you have just super soft shocks and you hit a bump and they max out and they slam all the way in, you're gonna feel like this thud, right? Well, a super soft foam would be like that shock has maxed all the way out and it's not rebounding, it's not giving back. So that's definitely something you want to stay away from. I could go to any random um, a Cabela's or Bass Pro Shops or REI or whatever, and you start touching foams, and if you can just easily compress that thing with your thumb all the way until it's like, if it's an inch thick and you can go all the way just between your thumb and forefinger, compress that down to 3/8 of an inch thick, that's going to feel absolutely miserable under load because really you're just hiking around with a very, very dense 3/8 inch thick foam. So finding a good foam that performs, that has cushion but also has kind of rebound to it is really critical. Uh, One way to avoid that, and some companies do this, we do this with our shoulder harness, is to do essentially what you would call like dual density foams, where you take a more dense foam, laminate it to a softer foam, and you're trying to get the best of both worlds there. You're trying to get that nice soft feel with essentially you're only going to feel that with the lighter loads. So those, 10 to 40 pounds. And then once you go over that, you're then compressing that soft foam and getting to the more dense foam and that's the one that's actually going to be providing any cushion under load. But again, You should never, when everything's properly set up in a well-designed pack, the shoulder harness, as far as the top of your shoulders go, shouldn't ever really be taking that much of a load. There should always be a little bit of give there, or a little bit of space between the top of the shoulder and the harness. Um, Same exact principles of foam apply to the hip belt, right? And that one even more so on the compression because there's so much force that you're applying to that hip belt, right? We've uh, a general, like we try to say 80/20, right? So if I got 100 pounds on my back, 80 pounds of that is on my hips, and there's only 20 pounds up on the shoulders. Um, and that hip belt's taking 80% of the load and really the foam in there needs to be just dialed in. So we've another aspect of foam is just long-term durability. If all I cared about was I'm going on this 10-day hunt, and I want the absolute most performance I possibly can get, I know exactly what foam I would use in the packet, but it's not the one that we use in our stock packs, right? Because it just breaks down too fast. It's a softer foam, and after 10 to 15 days in the field, that foam is going to break down. Foam has one way to rate foam is called compression set, and basically they put a weight on the foam and let it sit there for an hour or 24 hours, and then take it off, measure like where that foam has if it was 1 inch thick and they put the weight on there for 24 hours, right? When they took the weight off, if it was half inch thick, um, and then they're measuring how fast does it take to rebound, or does it rebound? Does it rebound to 90% of its original size, or does it rebound to 60% of its original size? So these softer foams have a really low compression set to where they're just not going to rebound over time. And that's where you see, the harness or hip belt look really nice, brand new, but a year of use, everything's all wrinkly. And what's happened is that all the foam has just shrunk down in size. Kind of a long rant on foam, but
No, that was like I was gonna
I
say that
could,
was a master
yeah,
class. Yeah.
I could take any single one part of the pack and break it down to, we could spend an hour on each topic. But same thing with lumbar foam. We laminate two foams together, so we have a very dense foam, the exact same foam that we use actually in the hip belt itself, uh, is in the back of the lumbar pad, and then the part that's contacting your skin, we use a much softer kind of open cell foam that will give you that cushion, kind of fill in the voids of so when you've got it really compressed right. It's not compressing perfectly even just because your back isn't, you've got your back of your hips and your spine and your lumbar pocket back there, like um so that foam is designed to kind of fill in the gaps and provide some contact to offset where the pressure points are back there. Um, so we do a dual density back there as well. One thing that is very common to happen is you throw 100 pounds on your back, you put the belt on, and going back to that kind of compression set I was just talking about, that lumbar pad is going to have like a certain resistance immediately. You get the belt tight. As you go hike half a mile down the road, you'll start to feel things like maybe like, oh, there's a little bit, what you're going to feel is a little bit more weight on your shoulders. And what's happened is that lumbar foam has started to take some compression, and you've essentially loosened up the hip belt. The guys will be like, I had to tighten my hip belt a little thing. Like the webbing must be slipping or sliding. No, that didn't happen. What happened is the lumbar pad has compressed and kind of settled into that spot. And now you just need to tighten the belt up. It's probably a half an inch each side, roughly, that you're going to kind of pull that webbing tighter to get it back to where it was when you originally started. And that's very, very common. And that's going to, depending on the quality of the foam that the backpack manufacturer used, that's going to, at mile 5, like mile 10, it's going to kind of keep getting a little bit worse and worse as that foam, you know, it's either just gonna, if it's really crappy foam, it's just gonna like completely compress immediately, and not like go back to where I was talking about there of not having any give, any rebound to it, just gonna be, you know, just completely smushed. Or if it's good quality foam, it can't resist compression forever, but it's going to fight back against it for quite a while. And one really, really good tip that I've tried my best to do, unless I'm in a big hurry, is, if I've got a 10-mile pack out, stop at like 3-ish miles, take the pack off, lay it on the ground, lay it kind of suspension side up. There's another tip. Just treat your foam, really take care of that. Try not to have it smushed. If you've got weight in the pack, um, don't set like, you can do this for a minute or 30 minutes or whatever, but don't, if you're good example would be your pack's in the back of your truck, you're doing weight training, you get done with a weighted hike, summertime, you throw the pack in the back of your truck and you have the hip belt and harness facing down with all that weight sitting on top of it. Basically, compression. So you've got that weight compressing the foam down below it in the bed of your truck, and heat are two really, really bad things for foam. So always have that weight down and your suspension facing up. So going back to a pack out, stop at 3 miles, take the pack off, lay it down, lay the suspension up, just rest for 10, 15, 20 minutes, whatever. That foam's going to rebound pretty quickly. And when you go to put the pack back on, it's going to feel, not only did you kind of alleviate all the pressure in your body, because there's a lot of strain going on and compression on your body that's happening. So just taking the pack off, giving yourself a little bit of a break, and then also letting that suspension, the foam recover a little bit. Both of those are going to play a big role in making that pack out as comfortable as possible.
In terms of heavy pack out, I kind of want to move on to, how a frame packs meat, how a pack system carries meat, the importance of making it sure it's secure, etc. But as we transition to that, is there anything else in called the anatomy, materials, design of a frame that you
No,
want
I
to
mean,
cover?
those are going to be the core, right? Go back to hip belt, really well designed, frame, good rigid frame that balances that rigidity of keeping it shape under heavy loads, but also with the light loads has some element of being dynamic to it, and then just a well-fitting shoulder harness, you know, again, that has adjustable torso up and down so you can get that properly fitted. And you get that combination and you're at least on the right start, right?
Mhm.
And then from there, yeah, from there you're really going into um, bag design, how's it going to haul meat, and accessories.
Well, let's talk about Hollow Meat. There's a lot here. I want to first highlight the importance of security and stability because I just feel like it gets very overlooked. And just to set the stage, at the end of a, say, successful elk hunt, you're carrying, you know, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 plus pounds of meat. Generally, some portion of that pack out, you're going to be off trail, navigating terrain. It could be, late in the day. You could very clearly be tired. This could be day 7 of a hunt. Like, who knows? But I will say it is I don't want to overstate it and say it's like very dangerous, but it is an opportunity where if your pack does not only carry that meat with some comfort, but do it with some security and stability, then you start to lose balance and the momentum of that heavy weight begins to take you or things like that. Like it's a real situation. And what gets overlooked, I think, is, and we can talk about this later as a whole separate topic if we want to, but weight distribution. So if you take 20 pounds, 40 pounds, 60 pounds, 80 pounds, how that weight is positioned and secured is going to make that weight feel better or worse. And that is, of course, only exaggerated with heavier loads and with meat. So, yeah, let's talk a bit about that. How the importance of actually securing meat and how that meat is attached to the frame, or, some people still use this concept of putting meat in a bag and, those topics there.
The topic is really, I mean, meat was what applies, but it's really just weight, right? You want the heaviest items as close to your back as possible, and also as essentially as close to the middle of your back as possible. So you don't want the weight too high, you don't want the weight too low. Um, proper placement of that weight can drastically change how the pack feels on your back, how it how it's balanced. And so you're going back to talking about off trail, steep terrain, cliffy stuff, right? Like you need to have that, really strapped down well to the pack and that load distributed over kind of a nice wide area. I don't, I really like to take I'll manipulate the meat inside of a game bag, right? So, what I like to do with like if I'm boning out everything, first of all, you absolutely want game bags, and this is specific to our pack designs, but it's not. It's going to apply to everything across the board. Um, Really want to put that meat in the game bag. It's boned out, and then I'm going to lay the frame down flat on the ground and manipulate that meat so that it's kind of the width of the frame, the height of the frame, and as thin as possible, right? So I want this nice flat rectangular cube that I want to turn the meat into. I don't want um, this bowling ball shape of meat that I just like, I'm going to throw right in the middle of the frame and strap this down and off I go, right? Like that is putting all the weight in one spot. Um, I mean, you could really easily do this experiment with take um, two 40-pound dumbbells, drop them in the bottom of your pack, and go for a hike. Come back, take the dumbbells out, put 40 pounds of gear evenly distributed throughout the pack inside there, and go do that hike. Even though both of them were 40-pound loads, the dumbbells are going to feel miserable. The evenly distributed gear is going to feel like a completely different pack every single time. So just always keep that in mind when you're putting meat and or gear into the pack. The weight distribution is really, really critical. And one of a big key rule though is never have the weight below the bottom of the pack, right? Your hip belt and the lumbar pad, which should be the very bottom of the pack, should be obviously above your butt. Never ever have anything down below that because once that weight is starting to sag down lower, it's like gravity has an exponential pull on that. Things are going to kind of tip back on you. The weight, instead of transferring down into the frame, is now pulling on the frame, and it's going to feel very different.
So as people are looking at packs as a whole, I mean, even all of that is helpful to know and to
Mhm.
look at, okay, this pack says it can carry, in this instance, meat. How does it do that, right? Like, where can I position it? How can I position it? And then how secure
Yeah,
can it be? So, of course, speaking from our context, because it's our context, but it is critical to have integrated compression straps, in our case, on the frame itself, and then also where our frame and bag connect and further compress meat and also provide lift to it. So it's not, as you said, like getting low and keep
correct.
sagging down.
Yep. Certainly, it's very common among the hunting industry to have what's called a load shelf. There's kind of a few different variations of it, but essentially, you're detaching the bag from the frame, putting the meat directly against the frame, as we talked about, getting that heavy weight as close to the body as possible. And then the bag comes back up, sandwiches the meat between the bag and the frame. Um, that's done a couple different ways. For us, it's a very simple. The bag, we do not do a quote unquote shelf at the bottom of the pack, right? The bag forms that shelf, but we have two compression straps that are attached directly to the frame that are there to help kind of assist you in getting that meat strapped down nice and snug to the frame. And then when the bag comes up, it's really when I talk about that weight not sagging down below the butt, the bag and the frame itself kind of form a wedge, and that's going to prevent the meat from sliding down as you're hiking down the trail, and really just having that strap down. Again, just you really want to do the best you can. If it's bone in, it's bone in. That's what it is. I prefer to pack most when I can. If it's under 5 mile pack out, um, even with elk, I'm not even going to bother to bone out. Just going to get it packed out. I like to leave the bone in to get as much meat as possible as I can from the butcher. Um, but yeah, you just that two compression straps built into the frame, snug it down nice and tight. Nothing's loose, nothing's floppy. bag comes back up, compresses against it, and then you've got typically you need some type of compression at the top, not so much for meat, maybe if the meat's a really tall load, but generally for the head and horns. That's going to kind of pull everything together nice and tight at the top and also stabilize, whatever horns, antlers you're packing out.
And again, I know we're in the podcast realm here, but as a part of this, we have video components, and so there's going to be more that you can see because clearly some of these topics get to the point where it's like, oh, it'd be great to picture that, right? It would be great to
Hmm.
picture what does it look like to have compression of head and horn. So definitely check out all the resources for everything because it is hard to fully go into that in a verbal discussion here. We've gone deep and it's been great on frames and materials and fits and what to look for and meat hauling. And again, you said, Steve, like people tend to start with bag and layout and
Hmm.
accessories, even. And I do want to address that. We just started with really what the priority should be, again, with the context of we are talking about hunting at the next level, like doing adventures that, as you said, Steve, maybe you didn't even think were possible. And so a good bag layout isn't going to help you if the frame's terrible, if you can't fit the pack to you, if you can't carry a heavy load effectively. But I do want to talk about bag layout a bit and
Hmm.
really what to look for and understand. And again, this goes all the way back to the beginning. Let's start with the context of a backpack style hunt. We're out in the mountains, self sufficient, carrying what we need. In what ways does bag layout affect the usability of the pack during the course of a hunt?
Yeah, to me, when you get into bag layout, you get into, to me, what's this classification of gear that's like non-essential slash if you don't like it, it's kind of a nuisance. It's annoying, but it's not really moving the needle on your hunt. Like if, the all of our K4 bags are what I would call, fairly full featured for a backpacking pack. They've got enough pockets and layout and access to things, right? If if I went tomorrow on a hunt and I had a version of a duffel bag with just one zipper on it. I mean, it'd be kind of annoying when I went to stop and I wanted to get my snacks out or I wanted to get my spine scope quickly, but it's not again moving the needle on the hunt. It's not going to drastically change the outcome of the hunt. But there are nuisances and this concept of we're trying to get across through as we talk about the gear in this project and really all the other topics that go into it, all of these things that we can kind of simplify and dial in when that this concept of like I'm not having to think at all about my gear, it's just working for me, then I can just focus on the hunt. So then that kind of brings back these things that are it's a slight nuisance to, well, maybe there's some more viability to like maybe I want to tailor this in, but again, it always comes secondary to the frame design. That's the number one most important thing. If yeah, if the frame doesn't fit, I really don't care what features the bag has or doesn't have. So going to the bags, it's pretty simple to you need to look at the cubic inches, you need to understand your gear, the duration of the hunt that you're doing. And some of time of year obviously comes into play here. If it's a really late season hunt, you're gonna have bulkier items that take up more space in the pack, and you're going to need a bigger bag. Generally, the bulky items are going to be down, something that's compressible, so they don't take up as much space as you probably think. But uh, yeah, so somewhere between for these type of hunts, I've done a 10-day sheep hunt out of a 3,200 bag, which is going to be, I would say, on the very small side of being able to do that type of hunt. To the next guy can be using a 7,200, our biggest bag on a 3-day hunt, and he's somehow managing to fill it all up. I will say there's definitely tips and tricks to packing to get things into smaller bag sizes. In general, I'm a really big fan of if you're between sizes to go down smaller. And that ties back to what we were talking about load distribution earlier in the frame design was that smaller bag is you're going to fill up the entire bag and all the items are going to stay in place and they're going to be distributed, you know, lengthwise, width and lengthwise of the pack, right? So it's going to be a really, well distributed load throughout it. If I take that same amount of gear and I put it into a 7200 bag, um, I'm only filling up half of the capacity of that bag. Everything's naturally going to slide down, sit down lower. Same concept as, if you got meat that's sliding down the pack, like everybody hates that, right? Oh, the meat was slipping out the bottom as I was hiking. Same thing's happening with if you got a really big bag and you're not using it to its full capacity. You can, if you're really good about it, by using the compression straps. We design our packs this way. A lot of packs have lots of compression straps all over them. If you're diligent about it, if you go back to I was talking about, you got that meat, you got your meat, it's boned out, it's in a game bag, and you got your frame laying flat on the ground. You can kind of manipulate that, turn it into a nice flat rectangular cube. Well, you can do the same thing with your gear. You can lay the pack down, kind of smush the gear around, get it spread out, so it's covering the width and length of the frame, and then compress it to the pack. The reality is you're kind of like standing your pack upright, you're throwing all your crap in there, you're cinching up the straps, and you're off hiking, and stuff's just going to naturally kind of sit down lower. So I always err on, if it's us and you're between a 3600 and a 5000, if you think you can make that 3600 work, try it. I think you're going to have a better experience. You do have to pay a little bit more attention maybe when you're packing, but I think going back to the performance of the frame is the priority. The weight in that pack is going to be better distributed into that frame with a smaller bag than a bigger bag, like hands down every time. Um, from there, as far as like how the pockets are laid out, it's I spend K4, I spent 3 years working on bag designs and 3 months working on 3 years working on the frame design and 3 months working on the bag designs. Like they're very simple to do. It's you got your overall size to it, the shape, and then where do I want a zipper, where do I want a pocket, um, and those are just preference things, right? So we design them to be pretty universal. It's symmetrical on both sides. So if you're right or left-handed, depending on if I'm rifle hunting, I'm right-handed, my rifle's on the right side, then the spine scope pocket's going to be on the left side. But then if you're left-handed, that flips around and there's a spine scope pocket on the right side. So we're trying to, you know, going back to loading the pack and weight distribution, I've got a rifle on one side, spine scope on the other. Those two are kind of counterbalancing each other so that the pack's riding well on my back. Um, then you've got your lid, you've got front pockets. Some of those they're just kind of, to me, preference things that just, again, if I gotta access my puffy that's in the main bag versus the front pocket, front pocket's going to be more convenient. But again, it's not going to be a make or break deal on any bag design for me personally.
And can you elaborate a bit more on this big idea of what you need access to during the day versus, storage for those items you don't actually need to get access to?
Yeah, going back to I, you know, big picture, I want to be very efficient while I'm out there hunting. I want to be focused on the hunt and not messing with my gear. We design our packs with the concept of mind of we're packing up camp every single morning. So inside the bag is just a big duffel bag. And I specifically, obviously we'll have video to go with this, specifically load my pack the same way every single day. I know exactly where my sleeping bag is, exactly where my tent is, exactly where my tent stakes are, where my jet boil is, where my food is, where my extra clothes are. All that's packed the exact same way inside the main bag all the time. And then the pack is surrounded with pockets, basically on the sides, front, and lid, I'm going to put everything that I need access to during the day, right? So, spotting scope, tripod, they're going to be right there in the side pockets. Water filter is going to be in a side pocket. Headlamp is either in my lid or a side pocket. Snacks are going to be in my lid. Any other kind of random items that I might need are in the lid. things that wouldn't be in my lid, like a kill kit, right? That needs to be like in the bottom of the pack, completely out of your way, out of sight, out of mind until you kill something. I think it's very common for people to put that like in an exterior pocket. But if it's not something I need, why have that in your way being a nuisance? So you want to think about, all right, today I'm doing this. I'm going to tear down camp. I'm going to hike a mile over to this glassing point, and then I'm going to plop down to that glassing point and spend all day there until I spot a mule deer buck that I'm going to watch bed. So it's like, okay, I need my sitting pad. I need my spine scope. I need my tripod, um, snacks, jet boil. Generally, I like to put that like right inside the main zipper of the pack. So I'm going to sit there, I'm going to make coffee. But just, I think it's really important to be aware of what you're doing when I'm packing my pack up. What am I doing today? What are the items I need to have access to? And so when I'm designing the bags, I certainly take that into consideration. Excuse me. Um, so when I'm designing the bags, I certainly take that into consideration of we've got the right amount of pockets and layout for all different types of hunts that I can have quick access to things that I need without having to do the, quote unquote yard sale. Like well, I just loaded up my pack real quick and my jet boil's all the way in the bottom. I want to make coffee right now. Okay, out comes the tent, out comes the sleeping bag, out comes my food, out comes my puffy. Oh, I finally found my jet boil, right? Like be diligent, pay attention to what you're doing, and you can make life a lot easier for yourself out there.
All right, so covered frame, performance fit, got to bags. People still love accessories, Steve, and they can be important, as you said, not critical. They're not going to change the hunt, but there's little things that make a hunt, I don't want to say more enjoyable, but like for us, our context, right? This is all we have as our context. Like having that in reach right there and secure is great. Having that Nalgene right there, secure but out of the way is great, right? So talk a little bit about not just our accessories, but when you go to look at accessories of a pack, there's obviously essentials that are great, and then there's for some folks they take that to the extreme and just have stuff everywhere. So just a little bit on attachments and accessories.
Accessories to me are just go right back to what I was just talking about with bag design. As I'm loading up that pack in the morning, I want to be thinking about what are the items that I need that can't be buried in the pack. I need quick access to while I'm hunting. And accessories are just a complement to that. So it could be a hip belt pouch that you run on one side of the hip belt, and it could be my cell phone in there, it could be my rangefinder, it could be a bag of gummy bears, depending on what I'm doing and what I need. So you want to just think about accessories from that standpoint. If you have a non-essential item for that hunting day as an accessory on the pack, that's just kind of silly in my mind. Of like, oh, I've got my first aid kit. Well, maybe that's a bad example. I was gonna say a first aid kit that's strapped to the outside of the pack. Okay, never mind. Like if you cut yourself or you have an emergency, you may need that quick access to that. But I think you can kind of get what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
There's like guys probably have a pouch for their kill kit that's strapped to the outside of the pack, right? Like that needs to be out of sight, out of mind. Um, Generally, I our pack systems are built with very minimal accessories in mind because any attachment to the pack, just through the nature of attaching, obviously it can be designed very well or very poorly. It's going to be floppy. It's kind of, it's just more prone to being less cohesive with the overall system. And so I generally try to stay away from accessories. I try to do as minimal as possible. If you look at our lineup, it's very, very simple. You really got a hip belt pouch. The InReach Mini, we made that pocket specifically on the shoulder harness. That's a safety concern. You want that, out and exposed and quick access to, which is why I designed that way. You've got a rifle carrier, right? Like the rifle is always going to be strapped to the outside of the pack and you want quick access to that. Um, and then you've got our Nalgene holder, which is going to carry your water right there on the hip belt. So really like the very essential items that I need quick access to, they've kind of got their dedicated space and pocket, slash, basically accessory. That's how you want to think about accessories in my mind. And just don't overdo it. Like I said, just what do I need during this hunt? All right, that's not built into the bag. okay, let's add that on, and go from there. So, but and just try to limit it again. Just can't stress this enough. Limit it to what you actually need and what you're using during the day. Everything else, just get inside the pack.
Before we wrap up on those accessories, Steve, one thing that comes up is, again, this is our context, but we don't offer a rain cover, but we do have a dry bag. So as I'm thinking of accessories, I'm thinking of this general principle of water resistance. What should people consider and look at there?
Yeah, water, it's really tough. Anybody who hunts really wet climates understands how almost impossible it is to keep everything dry throughout the duration of a long hunt. It's kind of a task that you're just not going to win. Um, there's there's a lot of misconception, a lot of fake news out there, I guess you could say, on um, what basically our pack fabric is waterproof. Therefore, they'll say it in the notes like, well, it's not, because our fabric's waterproof doesn't mean the pack's waterproof. Um, so in the development of K4, I did a lot of testing to see if I could get more water resistance out of a pack. And at the end of the day, the answer is no. Like anytime, every a seam is where it's going to leak immediately. So whether that fabric is water resistant or waterproof is completely null and void, because that's not where it's not coming through the fabric, it's going through the seams. If you have a pack with absolutely no seams, then yeah, then the fabric would matter, but that's not the reality of it. Like guys don't want a bag designed with no seams on them, right? That would be the epitome of a duffel bag. You could just like zero seams, the buckle. I mean, it'd just essentially be taking a roll top dry bag and compressing it to the frame. Like that's the only way you could truly get a waterproof, quote unquote, waterproof backpack. Um, so really, um, if your options to keep gear dry are a pack cover, which is going to be your kind of standard industry default to just a rain cover. It's a waterproof fabric that's got elastic sewn around it, and it just you just snap it around the outside of the pack. Um, to me, they're just a giant pain in the ass. They don't work I mean, they kind of help keep the rain off, but if you're in a really wet climate, eventually, you know, that's not going to work out for you. They're by nature have to be kind of big and floppy on the pack just because they need to be oversized to account for different, as the pack grows and shrinks depending on how much you're packing in there. So they're floppy, the winds blowing, they're flopping all over the place. You get, you know, specific to this project, we're going to be in Alaska. All three of the hunts are going to have heavy aspects of busting through brush, things like that. The rain cover is just going to get ripped off of there in the first half a mile as you're hiking through that stuff. Our solution has been to do an internal dry bag, which is essentially what I was talking about there a second ago, is a roll top, fully RF welded seam dry bag that fits the entire inside dimensions of the pack. So it turns your backpack into a completely waterproof backpack, where you could be wading across a river, fall into that river, swim 100 yards downstream, finally get out, come out the other side. Everything's still dry on the inside. And our dry bags weigh between, I think, 6 and 9 ounces. Your average rain cover, a super light one would be like 3 to 4. Most of them are going to be kind of 5 to 7 ounces, so that you're talking a couple ounce weight penalty to go to a fully waterproof system. Downside is you did turn your pack into a duffel bag. Getting gear in and out is kind of a pain in the butt. But again, going back to how you load your pack, I'm just putting the items that actually matter inside there that need to stay dry. So sleeping bag, tent, kind of depend like a tent fly that's already soaking wet in the morning from condensation. That's going to be on the outside of the pack that can get wet because you can just shake it off before you set up your camp that night. But maybe the inner of your tent, my extra clothes, food, depending on how I've packed, could be in there. generally it's all sealed up in Ziploc bags and would be waterproof anyways. So, and then everything outside of the pack is spine scope and tripod. Guys get kind of hung up on, I don't want my tripod to get wet or my spine scope to get wet. Or there's certain items that are just built to be waterproof. They can get wet. It's not going to hurt them at all. Just strap those to the outside of the pack like you normally would, whether it's sunny and dry outside or cloudy and raining. It's not a big deal. So that's definitely how I approach keeping things dry and really, the packs in general do a very good job of shedding light rain. So if it's just kind of drizzling and you're out there hunting for an hour or two, 95% of your pack on the inside is going to be just fine at the end of that. It's really when you get into these really wet climates, the Oregon, Washington coast, up in Alaska, things like that, that you really got to start paying attention to this as far as something because you're dealing with it day in, day out. When you're in Idaho, Wyoming, Colorado, I got a dry bag, stays in the truck. I check the weather forecast right before I'm leaving for a hunt. It's like, oh yeah, it's going to rain a lot day 2 and 3. Then I throw the dry bag in. And there's other options too with garbage bags and lots of ways to kind of keep things dry. But in general, understand that, that'd be another topic, like waterproof zippers, don't do a damn thing. You've still got 2 seams left and right of the zipper. Even if the zipper itself helps reduce a little bit of the water getting into the pack, you've got seams right there. I've tested this numerous times. Waterproof zippers just create durability issues. They're not going to be as hold up and last as long as your standard zipper. But saying apples to apples, like same YKK zipper, a waterproof versus non-waterproof version, that waterproof version will fail sooner. So avoid those because they mean nothing. Overall, like guys, I really like how this pack carries a rifle. And so they buy that one, but it's kind of, they don't, it's really easy, especially when you're shopping online, to pay attention to like bag features and accessory features. You got to start with the frame. I mean, it's absolutely everything. So if you're shopping for packs, go buy and you're on a budget, go buy the frames from 3 different companies, load those up, test those out, find the frame you like the best, and then whatever bag they sell and accessories that go along with it, then that's just what it is. Like I would never choose company X over company Y because I like their bag designs better.
Well, there you have it, guys. We will be doing more on packs throughout this project, including some how-to on fitting, loading, and more. Again, there is an overview video if you haven't seen that, and a link to ask us questions if you have specific questions. So be sure to check out the links in the show description. And if you haven't yet, hit subscribe or follow in your podcast app so that you receive future episodes automatically, and we'll talk to you soon.